Hey guys, welcome to another marvelous videos, and to a new format. In today's video, we'll be talking about, is Will Byers more powerful than Vecna in Stranger Things Season 5? Stranger Things has been the talk of the town for almost a week now, and I am low-key loving the high that comes with all of these crazy theories.
The most speculative character has been Will Byers, and like the Duffer Brothers said, he has always been the centerpiece of the entire show ever since that demogorgon dragged him down to the Upside Down in Season 1. But now, more than ever, we're excited to see what his bowl-cut head does next, especially after the world went batshit crazy with him lifting them demodogs up in the air and killing them in Veca style. Given that his abilities mirror that of Vecna's, inevitably, we have all been wondering the true extent of his powers and if they can actually end up trumping over the noseless monster. So without wasting another moment, let's discuss if Will Byers can end up being more powerful than Vecna in Stranger Things Season 5. Will Byers has spent more time trapped inside the Upside Down. I guess all of you already know how Stranger Things The First Shadow maps Henry Creel's origin story. Set in 1959, the Broadway show takes us to the time the Creels first moved to Hawkins, where Henry began committing his horrendous crimes that led him to Dr. Martin Brenner. While Stranger Things Season 4 led us to believe that Henry Creel was always a troubled and disturbed child who was born with psychic powers, that is far from being the truth. Furthermore, the Netflix series suggested that the first time he ever traveled to the Upside Down was as an adult, when Eleven banished him there after she temporarily opened a gate. But even that was a misdirection to keep us from figuring out the truth, because in Stranger Things The First Shadow, when the United States was holding secret experiments involving the USS Eldridge in 1943, they hoped to use a force field to turn the ship invisible and undetectable to the Germans. However, the ship was instead transported to Dimension X, where most of the crew was killed by demogorgons. In this crew, Captain Brenner, who was Dr. Brenner's father, was the only one to make it out alive and return to the real world. Apparently, he was badly injured, had a strange, unidentified blood type, and soon met his demise, but not before telling his son about this strange, otherworldly place called Dimension X. From that very moment, it became Martin Brenner's personal mission to go back to that mysterious place and uncover what really happened. He almost became successful in his mission after founding the Nevada experiments, and his team had even created all the necessary experiments to open a gate to Dimension X once again. Sadly, one of the guys he trusted turned out to be an undercover Soviet spy who ended up stealing the equipment before it could be activated, and then hid it inside a cave near the laboratory in Nevada. Now, during this time, the Creel family, including an 8-year-old Henry, lived in the small town of Rachel, which was not very far from those caves. One day, while Henry was exploring the place with a spyglass, he accidentally went inside the cave near the military base. He was eventually found 12 hours later, outside the cave without having any memory of what exactly happened to him. Henry basically found the stolen device inside this cave, and he accidentally activated this equipment, which ended up sending him into Dimension X for the very first time in his life. After he was pulled into this horrifying version of our world, Henry was met by the shadowy entity that has been haunting him ever since. So it was indeed the Mind Flayer that had corrupted him and potentially gave him his psychic abilities. Even though he returned home about 12 hours later, Henry was never the same again. Shockingly, his blood type had also changed, and so had his personality, making him a completely different person, which is exactly what happened to Will after his first trip to the Upside Down. So far, we know that Will was dragged to the Upside Down on the 6th of November, 1983, by a demogorgon, who in turn was ordered by the Mind Flayer through Vecna. Within the 12 hours he spent inside the Upside Down, Will spent some time running and hiding until he was caught by Vecna and plugged into one of his fleshy tube-like vines that pretty much pumped the Mind Flayer juice to permanently connect him to the hive. In Season 2, the Mind Flayer used that connection to already flay Will and turn his body into its host, essentially using the boy as a spy so it could successfully reshape the world in its own vision. However, Joyce freed Will of the Mind Flayer's possession by driving its shadowy essence out of her boy using heat, thus making Will's body uninhabitable for the Mind Flayer. Even then, he always felt a connection to the Mind Flayer through the shivering feeling at the back of his neck, which activates only when the Mind Flayer or Vecna activates their machinations within the right side up. In Season 5, We have just seen how connected Will is to the hive mind, especially with him being able to siphon Vecna's abilities to lift the demogorgons in the air and snapping them dead, just like Vecna does with his victims. His eyes rolled back to his head, and he tapped into his link to the hive to kill these monsters at 3 different locations at the same time. That was the first time we have seen Will kill anything in the entire show, right? But with Henry Creel, the killing started very early. As compared to Will, who spent a week in the Upside Down, thus being exposed longer to that evil environment, Henry spent only half a day, and yet the Mind Flayer's influence was stronger. Will tried to resist it, and yes, the essence of the Mind Flayer was driven out of him by Joyce, but he never lost his connection to the entity, meaning he was resisting its influence long enough to become a spy in Season 5. As opposed to that, Henry Creel started killing the animals in Hawkins rather early, and the fact that he could not resist the Mind Flayer's manipulation for a longer period of time automatically makes him the pawn in the Mind Flayer's long game. While Vecna might be acting on orders from the shadowy entity, Will is siphoning Vecna's powers to spy on his plans and turns the tables on him by channeling those powers. How does Will's powers work? So, the first thing that the Duffer Brothers and Noah Schnaps have asked us to understand is that Will did not suddenly turn into a new version of 11 or Vecna. His newfound abilities does not come from his own mental strength. He simply channels what already exists within the hive mind, which is basically the collective consciousness that links every creature and structure in the Upside Down. That is exactly why I called Will a spy, because he has partial access to Vecna's operating system, but even then, cannot open every file lodged within this system. Now, we know that 11 generates power on her own because she was born with it, but Vecna? He literally shapes and controls the Upside Down through the Mind Flayer. And compared to that, Will simply redirects what already exists to his gain. But that does not make what he does any less impressive. It simply defines the scope. By tapping into his mind, he could just focus on the link he shared with the hive to use it to his own benefit. He's not floating cars up in the air, closing gates to the Upside Down, or even rearranging human memories, because Will works inside a very specific box, which belongs to the show's main big bad. The only reason why Will can kill the creatures or look through their eyes is because they are connected to the hive mind, and he's a part of that structure himself. That explains why he can wipe out demogorgons so naturally, because they are tied to the same mental network that he has been sensing since the very first season. In that sense, this connection also limits him because he cannot use these abilities anywhere that is not linked to the hive mind, as Will does not create his own powers, but only reacts to whatever flows through him, meaning his newfound ability is reactive, not active. And when you compare him to Vecna, the contrast becomes even clearer. Even if he is channeling the Mind Flayer's powers, Vecna is the creator of the system, so everything in the Upside Down functions directly under his control. We've seen him invade memories, distort realities inside people's minds, and command demogorgons like they were extensions of his own body. I don't know about the future, but right now, Will is nowhere near that level. What he has is an accidental entry point, and it's worth remembering that Vecna definitely did not plan for that access to be used against him. This basically means that Will is essentially a glitch in the code, in the form of a vulnerability that appeared and is now out of the creator's hands, which is exactly why we are eager to see how Vecna reacts when he finally realizes Will to be a spy. What's interesting is how this particular glitch in the hive mind also makes Will super valuable, because he has been sensing danger before anyone else since Season 2, has always felt Vecna's movements almost in real time, and has an internal sensitivity to the hive mind that no other character has. This pretty much makes him more than just a weapon, because Will is literally a breach in the system that Vecna is grossly underestimating. I mean, yeah, 11 is a badass who can attack from the outside, but she could never understand the network of the Mind Flayer's hive as intricately as Will does. Sure, Vecna has full internal control, but he underestimated how deep Will's connection goes, because his bowl-cut head now sits right between them, and neither of the two can replicate that. Plus, there is also the emotional factor, which Stranger Things has always treated as part of Will's conflict with the Upside Down. He has never been emotionally stable, and his powers depend way more on his psychological state than the other characters. We see that 11 grows after she finds her sense of identity, and Vecna grows after he has absolute control, even if it comes at the cost of becoming the Mind Flayer's 5-star general. In contrast to that, Will only grows after he confronts his trauma and fear headfirst, which makes his power a lot more unpredictable, as that puts him in a space where absolutely anything can happen. Can Will become more powerful than Vecna? So, logically speaking, Will does not surpass Levin when it comes to powers, and he is definitely nowhere near Vecna's total command of the Upside Down, because he does not have autonomy, and he does not generate any powers on his own. But then he does operate in a place where Levin cannot reach and where Vecna does not have full control. That is exactly what makes him the kind of character who can very strategically shift the course of the game. I mean, sure, Levin has raw power and Vecna has structure, but Will has access, which he can exploit at any given point, and sometimes that access matters more than brute force. Now, you may be wondering, how the hell would that make a difference? Well, we know that Byers can now interface with the hive mind from within, and because his connection to the hive mind is like a controller, he can easily block commands sent to the creatures or even create certain noise that disrupts Vecna's communication with his demodog army. He may not be the strongest one in a one-on-one fight, but his abilities as a spy who can block communication between the 5-star general and his army, which makes him invaluable for the party when it comes to stopping Vecna from reshaping the world and, in turn, the most inconvenient piece for the villain. I absolutely love how Stranger Things has been building Will into this unpredictable piece of puzzle from the very beginning, because given his long-drawn exposure to the hive mind, Vecna, and the Mind Flayer, he is essentially someone who can flip the battle during vital moments. Again, he may not be able to do it through force, but through the internal flaw that he represents within Vecna's tightly interwoven system. However, there is also a very real limitation, because as long as Will cannot use this connection without relying emotionally on it or relying on Vecna himself, he simply remains a tool, not a power source. If the Duffer Brothers decide to eventually break that dependency and allow Will to take control for himself, then yes, he could evolve in a way that fully changes the entire dynamic, thus making the comparison between him and Vecna look completely different. But I really don't think that is where the show has been pointing us, because irrespective of the big reveal about Will in episode 4 season 5, Eleven is still the biggest telekinetic powerhouse, and Vecna is still the Grand Master of the mental war, as compared to Will, who can only interfere because he is in the right place and connected to the right system, which should sever and fade as soon as he steps away from Hawkins. I strongly believe that Will cannot win this war alone against Vecna, and I also know for a fact that the party will not be able to win against the noseless villain without Byers by their side. Putting all the batshit crazy theories about his death aside, Will might just end up being the main reason Vecna would end up losing, and without him, the gang cannot just rely on Elle and now Callie, hoping that they would win against Vecna and his hive mind army. I simply cannot wait for the next big twist when Will ends up flipping the table on Vecna just when he comes very close to completing his mission to reshape the world in his vision. But that was just my 2 cents. What do you guys think? Does Will have the potential to become stronger than Vecna? Let us know about your thoughts and opinions in the comment box below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one, be safe, and thanks everyone.